some event change. Change is an event. Actually, the events are written in the parentheses. So change is an event. Click is an event. Select is an event. Events are written in the parentheses. I will first show you that. For example, in this design, I will keep a button. So let's go to HTML page. Let's put a button here. Let's put a button here. So button as class BTN and BTN primary. Okay, button as the register. Now for this register button, this is a register button. For that register button, I want to write some event. Usually, how event is written, we will go to the component. In the component, event requires a function. We will write a function. We will write a function, public, and register click. This function is your own function name. On register click, I want alert saying that registered successfully. This message should come. That message should come. Registered successfully, that message should come. So that is what we click, register click. And this register click function should execute when user clicks the button. That means in Angular, event is written in the parenthesis and the event is click. And when click happened, it have to call the function register click. That is how generally we use the approach. That is how generally we use the approach. That means usually this is event binding. This is event binding. That means we have the property binding the model to view, and event binding identifying the changes, notifying the changes actually. Later you will learn about events that have a separate session for us. Now I save this, and you can see when I click on this register, then it should show an alert, registered successfully. That means an event fires up and it will display that message. Event fires up and it will display a message. So that event notifies to the model about the change. It notifies about the change, right? That is what happens. So technically, here we need two important things. One is the property binding, another one event binding. To identify the changes, update the changes, we need property and event binding. These are the two techniques we need to follow. So two-way binding requires these two approaches. Two-way binding requires these two approaches. That means it needs property and it needs event binding. So methods actually. That means the point is very simple. So you saw that event how to write and property how to write. Now we are having a text box, and usually by default text box property that shows value is value. Value is the default property, and actually change is the default event. So value is the property and change is the event actually. Change is the event. Usually what happens now is property contains the value, change event identifies the change occurred in the value. Now, a model, Angular provides a model directive. Angular provides a model directive called ng model. It provides a model directive called ng model. So technically, what is directive actually? Those we are going to discuss in directives concept separately again. But as of now, directives are used to extend HTML, to make static HTML dynamic. That point is enough as of now. Directives are used to extend HTML. Directives make the HTML dynamic. HTML is static and directives makes them more declarative and it makes them dynamic. So directives are used on HTML to make it dynamic actually. And ng model is a directive. This directive have two techniques actually. What are those techniques? It uses square brace, means property binding. It uses square brace, property binding, and it uses round brace, that is event binding. That means when you attach this directive to text box, then what it will do is it will get the value. It will bind the data to that particular value. And if any change occurred, it will identify the change by using event binding and updates back to the model. That means now Angular is using a two-way binding technique through property and event binding. Square brace is for property, and round brace, this is parenthesis, is for event binding. Model is using the default property of control. Default property of control is value, and default event of that particular control. The default event is change. And the square brace binds the data to the view, and this round brace event identifies the changes in the view and updates back to the model. And very important, ng model will keep all the changes tracking in a reference, some txt name, something like this. That means the value you entered here, so some value you entered here, that value the model will collect and it will bind here. And any change occurred inside the value, it will update back here. That means it uses two-way binding technique. So who is responsible for handling two-way binding in application? So two-way binding in application